Good morning, students. Now we will begin the topic settled agriculturalist. Some other tribals group like the Mundas of Chota Nagpur began settling down instead of moving from one place to another. So there were some tribal groups like Mundas of Chota Nagpur plateaus. They started to settle down at one place instead of moving from one place to another. They cultivated crops to meet their food requirement. They used the plow for cultivation. After living on a particular tract of land for years, they gradually acquired right of ownership. In many cases, the land belonged to the clan as a whole. All the members of the clan were regarded as the descendants of one common ancestor. Some of them appointed their own chiefs who administered and controlled the territory. So, the Munda started to cultivate the crops so that they could meet the requirement of their food. Further, they used the plow for the cultivation. They lived on a particular tract of the land for years, and gradually they took the ownership of that tract of the land. Further, in many cases, the land that began to the whole clan. All the members of the clan were regarded as the descendant of a common ancestor. Some of them appointed their own chiefs who administered and controlled the territory. Now, impact of colonial rule on tribal lives. Before the colonial rule, tribal societies had lived in relative isolation. So before the colonial rule started in India, the tribal societies lived in isolation in the Indian subcontinent. Now, with the expansion of colonial rule in Indian subcontinent, a great change came about in the life of tribal communities. So, with the expansion of colonial rule in Indian subcontinent, there was a great change in the life of the tribal communities in the Indian subcontinent. Now, colonialism resulted in the encroachment of the forest land by British and also had an adverse effect on the political and the economic social life of the tribal. So as the colonial or the British reached the Indian subcontinent, they started encroaching the forest. It was enclosed by the forest by the British, and it had adverse effect on the political and the economical and the social life of the tribals. Now, let us now look at how the colonial rule influenced the tribal societies. The first is political impact, administration of tribal areas. So, the British wanted to bring tribal area under their complete control. However, they also knew the danger of exposing them to mainstream society. So the main thinking of the British was to bring the tribals to the mainstream, even though they knew the danger of exposing them to the mainstream. The tribal chiefs were allowed to enjoy their traditional rights nominally under strict British supervision. So whoever was the tribal chief of the society, they were allowed to enjoy their traditional rights under the strict British supervision. Now, the tribal chiefs' functions and powers changed completely. They lost their administrative power and authority. Further, under the British rule, the tribal chief lost the function and power and were changed completely. Even they lost their administrative power and authority. Now, they had to pay tribute and discipline their tribal group as per the commands of the British. So they had to pay the tribute to the British, and further they have to maintain the discipline of the tribal group as per the command of the British. Now, the joint ownership of the tribal land was disrupted, which resulted in the tension and conflict within the tribal societies. So the joint ownership of the tribal land within the British and the tribal people, it resulted in the dispute and tension and conflict within the tribal societies. Now, economic impact. The economic impact included various aspects that have been discussed below. So the various aspect of the economic impact has been discussed below. The first one is land settlement. The British were against Jhum system of cultivation that required moving from one plot of land to another because they found it hard to control the tribals who were constantly on move. So the British was against the Jhum system of the cultivation because it was very difficult for them to track the tribal people when they moved from one place to another place. Now, to ensure easy control as well as a regular source of revenue, they tried to introduce a land settlement in the forest area and fix the revenue demands of each area. So to make the easy control and regular source of revenue, what they did, they introduced the land settlement in the forest area and they fixed the revenue demand of each area. Now, under this settlement, the British forced the tribals to settle down at one place. As a result, they could measure land under the cultivation and fix the revenue. So under this system, the British even forced the tribals to settle down at one place. As a result, they could measure the land under the cultivation and they could fix the revenue for the tribals. Now, the tribal group, especially in the northeast, resisted this policy of the British. So this policy of the British was resisted by the tribal community, especially of the northeast area. Now, commercialization of agriculture. The British introduced commercialization of agriculture to get raw material for their industries in England. The British made the agriculture as a commercial so that they can get the raw material for their industries, which was in England. Now, it led to the practice of plantation cultivation, under which the cash crops such as jute, indigo, rubber and tea was produced. So under the commercialization of agriculture, the plantation cultivation was done, under which the cash crops such as jute, indigo, rubber and tea was grown. Now, apart from huge investment of money and labor, this practice also required large field, so the tribal communities were forced to surrender large tract of forest land which had been their home for thousands of years. Thus, this broke down the tribal self-sufficient economy. So apart the large money was invested on the labor, the practice also required a large area of the field. So they forced the tribal communities to surrender their land so that the commercial agriculture could be done. So this practice, it left thousands of tribal away from the land which have been their home for thousands of years. So it broke the tribal self-sufficient economy. Now, tomorrow we will begin the topic, the system of caste economy. Thank you.